All right, we are set. Welcome, everyone. I think we'll get started, though I expect we'll have a number of people hopping in the next few minutes. I want to make sure our presenters have as much time as possible. Thank you so much for joining us all today. We did set this up as a normal Zoom meeting and not as a webinar so that you are able to access the speakers throughout the presentation. You can come off of speaker or come off of mute, and you can turn on your videos if you would like to participate in that way. Feel free to raise your hand if you have questions. You can also drop questions into chat, and I will be managing chat and raising my hand. So if you don't feel like jumping in mid-speech, I'm happy to do that for you. So welcome. I want to start off by introducing you to our two speakers. We have Dr. Michelle Sauer here today and Allison Parks. They run their own company called RNA Editing, but they also both have very long histories in research, doing their own research as well as supporting research administration, and they are expert grant writers. I've worked with both of them and they're stellar, so we're very lucky to have them here today. I'm going to turn the floor over to them to talk. They're going to share screen with all of you, and we are here for 90 minutes, so settle in. I think we're gonna need it. And as I said, feel free to introduce yourself in chat or put questions there, and I will be managing that. Thank you all.
Okay, and what we are noticing is, well, this is a great lesson to us.
Yeah.
We are blind.
Yeah.
So we are only able to see our slides, as I see right now, rather than fix it. We're just going to rely on Molly. Molly, just interrupt us if anyone has a question or their hands up. And I think I can speak for Allie and I. We're real excited to be here. We understand that y'all might be from different backgrounds, so we have scheduled this talk as an overview, and it's sectioned out. But at any point, if you have questions or you want specific advice on how this applies to you, I saw there's someone that's in the education sector, we can tailor it. I think between Allie and I, we've worked for almost all of the different agencies we're going to talk, or worked with, not for. Words are important. We've worked with the different agencies. So hopefully we can find some grants and opportunities that will match what you're looking for. So the basics. When we talk about sponsors, we're talking about who is issuing the grant or the opportunity. They are typically the people that have the money. When we say a solicitation, sometimes we say RFP or a document, but basically this is going to tell us what the sponsors want you to turn in and if you're even eligible to apply. We're also going to talk about the timeline and creating a plan that works for you and the opportunity. We'll talk about some tricks. This is really where we come in. While we are grant writers, most of the time we have transitioned into an editing role with our clients. They have the ideas and we use our skill set to sell their ideas. I know that's a bad word, to convince the powers that be that if this grant or opportunity is not funded, the world's going to end. Allie is the budget extraordinaire. I do not do well with details. Allie does well with details. And I would say that maybe that's the first lesson we give you, is that grant writing is not a solo enterprise. I know it's not May the 5th yet, but we can do some Star Wars references. The idea is to find a partner, whether it's with another collaborator in an institution or within your institution, but you definitely need to find someone that has a different skill set than you so that you can make this your grant. There is no possible way we can cover everything in 90 minutes, and we're actually going to try to keep our talking down to about an hour so we can have more interaction at the end. I see the chat comments, but Molly, you let us know if we need to. We can't see what they are. We just see there's a notification for chats.
You're good. People are just introducing themselves, and I'm dropping your bios in there.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So where do we begin? I think it all begins in where to find the opportunities. I would say that this is probably our most requested service And for those of you today, you're getting a freebie. We've done some searching for Maine opportunities, and we're going to walk you through the process of what we do when we're trying to find an opportunity for one of our clients. So there are three main different ways to apply for funding. And the first is the most typical way. It's a proposal. This is, we are submitting basically our ideas on paper in response to particular funding opportunities. The way that the proposal is funded could be a grant or a contract. Typically, to receive either, you're going to have to submit a proposal. There are exceptions to everything I say, so just know this is general terms. But a grant, by definition, is awarded to an individual or an institution. It's also really important to know where the money is going, to an individual or institution. And the funds are usually restricted so that they're dedicated to this specific purpose that was outlined in the proposal, and it meets what the solicitation requires. Updates on accomplishments and outcomes are usually required by the sponsor, so you have to give some report that, yes, you're using the funding the way you said it would. Contracts, on the other hand, are typically very specific. They're agreements, sometimes they're in coordination. And so a contract with a sponsor typically is to acquire a specific item or service. These contracts usually have more restrictions, usually tighter timelines, and there's an expectation of a deliverable. So just so you know, when you submit a proposal, you need to know whether you'll be getting a grant or a contract. That's one thing to know and understand. So where to find them? The first challenge is really identifying what's available. And this year has proven that it's gotten even more difficult to identify what is available. We had to update this course even up to last week because things are changing. So just know that what we're saying is valid as of today, May 1st. Federal opportunities are supposed to all be available on the website grants.gov. State and local governments may put their opportunities on grants.gov, but many of them have their own websites. And we are seeing a discordance right now between grants.gov and the state and local government. So you'll want to find your own state and local government website and bookmark that. Foundations. Sometimes I'm going to put both of these up here because foundations in industry are their own unique beast. Each foundation has its own rules. Sometimes they follow, a lot of the biomedical institutions may follow roles and proposals, outlines that look a lot like the NIH or the NSF, particularly if they're medical or science related, but sometimes they're completely different. There's one foundation we work with, and you actually have to write a letter. You're limited to 2 pages of a letter, and that's all. So when we go to foundations or industry, just know that there are all new rules. You're really going to have to know that specific foundation, that specific industry. So in short, searching for grants is a very decentralized process. That's why we get paid to do it. And there are services and software that will do this for you besides us. Some of them are called Pivot, Spin, and we'll send a few links. A lot of universities and even states may subscribe to certain databases or newsletters. Even the Small Business Association website has some, but many of these also include cost. So in each of these search engines, you have to balance what you're getting with what the cost is. But like we said, today we're going to give you a few freebies. Ironically, what I do suggest as your first step in looking for a grant opportunity is Google. Like I tell my children all the time, when they ask me a question, have you Googled it? Google it first, please. Sometimes with colleagues, have you Googled it? Have you Googled it? So Google it. Who funds research for Maine education? That is a valid Google search. And sometimes, especially these days, I find some good information. For instance, I Googled small businesses in Maine. And I think what's important, I'm going to kind of walk you through this. The first thing you see on a Google search, some of you already know this, but you will notice it says sponsored, right? So I typically scroll through until I see unsponsored elements. It doesn't mean that a sponsored link is not real or that it's even not worthwhile, but I hesitate. Typically, there's a reason why they're advertising for it. Sometimes their costs are a little bit higher. And it's my personal opinion that a sponsored link often overcharges and underdelivers. So that's how I looked at this. So I completely skipped that first link, didn't even look at it. Maybe it's great. I don't know. But I went to the next link, Resolve Pay, and I was like, wow, this has actually quite a few gems in it. I would encourage you to look at it. And there was one link within it that led me to the main funding network. And that might be particularly relevant. It is a search engine for finding funding opportunities in Maine. So there you go. There's your first freebie that you might find something to work with. If you keep scrolling, I know like we have like below the fold and in internet advertising, if you can get your search to come up above. So when you first open it up, you're going to pay for that. And that's a, yay, look at us above the fold, even though there's no folding on a web page. But if you scrolled below the fold, so what you don't see on the first screen, but you keep scrolling down, I found some other good stuff in there. And if you're like me, you could spend hours just going down the rabbit hole. And that's why I actually enjoy finding opportunities, because now I get paid for going down a rabbit hole and looking at all of the different links and the possibilities. If you're like my husband, when the first link doesn't give you what you want, you get very frustrated. And that is why I'm employed. And also why I manage most of the house coordination. So there you go. The first thing is you've got to decide, are you going to do the search? Maybe you have a partner that loves doing rabbit holes, but who's going to go through and figure out which of these links is going to work best for you? And if not, like I said, there's lots of different sources. If you're going to do this yourself, and this is what we give to our clients, we create, I typically use Excel, and on there, I'm going to make sure I include the web page link, and I'm going to figure out what is the helpful information. So if you're doing this yourself, what do you need to record when you're trying to figure out which opportunity works for you? In addition to the link of where you found it, because man, if you have the perfect link and then it closes down and you've lost it forever, and that Google search gives you something different next time, very, very frustrating. But in a minimum, and you can put as much detail as you want, but in a minimum, what we send is the sponsor itself, and typically a link to the sponsor, their own webpage. You got to know the deadline. And I often, even if the deadline has passed or it's far in the future, you can collect those, because if the deadline has passed, maybe this opportunity will come up again. The amount of money they're offering, you would hate to say, oh, this syncs up great, but they're only going to give us $10,000 and the project you're looking for is $1 million. So knowing how much money they're willing to give out. Another element too, we just finished working on a grant and they received 250 applications and they're funding 2. So just because there's a whole pool of money doesn't mean all of it will be given out, particularly for federal contracts. So not only the amount of money that's available for the individual grant, maybe the whole pool of money, how it's worked out, how many applications, how competitive it's going to be. Those might be other information that you would want to know. Also, if it has some strange restriction, I wrote one, it was for a foundation of golfers. And part of it was that you had to prove that, you know, you were a golfing member at some club. That was something very unique and not normal. So if there's something very unique about this opportunity, you might want to write it down, particularly if it deals with eligibility. So I went on to grants.gov, and I just wanted to give you kind of a sneak peek, especially for those of you who may not have been on this website, what it looks like. So a lot of people, you go to grants.gov and you see right up there on the tab, search grants, you write in your keyword, and away you go. And you're going to get overwhelmed with, you know, this initial search of what's available, over 2,500 opportunities are available. And as you can see here, I have only selected forecasted. Now, forecasted doesn't mean that this opportunity is coming out, and we are seeing a lot of that. But it does mean that it's possible. Posted mean it is officially out, so typically that means it's open. If you look at the first two, the first one was posted in October of 23, and it closed in January of 24. So that's, if you were looking for farm to school grants, it's already closed. So maybe we can look at it, but it's not going to be the prime opportunity for us. The next one, if you are looking for something for the Finland Public Diplomacy Annual Program Statement, that doesn't close till July. So if you've got some crossover with the Finland Public Diplomacy, hey,
you got opportunities.
This could be, okay? That was with the Department of State. What I encourage you to do is actually go to that left-hand column. If it's closed or archived, do not go to it. Those are no longer functional. But look at the different things. Perhaps you're looking for a contract or you're only looking for a grant. Cooperative agreements mean you're working together with an agency. So those are way more complicated. We're not even going to touch them today. But in the eligibility section, this is where you can get really specific. Who are you? Are you a for-profit? Are you a city or town government? You can pick who you are, and it's going to filter it down to get what you need so that you're not sorting through 2,500. Hopefully you're sorting through, I typically, if I can get it down to 50, that's a reasonable rabbit hole to pursue. Okay. So again, when you're searching on grants.gov, only look for forecasted or posted. Make sure the funding instrument is what you're looking for. Use those eligibility criteria to make sure it is specific, that you are able to apply. And then if someone told you like, oh, it's coming out from this agency, you can, or if you know, like, hey, I'm just going to look for funding from the Department of Education. You can select by agency. I typically don't do that. Do we do that?
It depends on what I'm looking for. So if I'm specifically looking for something in the field of transportation, then yeah, I'll reduce it down to the Department of Transportation. Something that I think needs to be highlighted here is that grants.gov is mostly for federal opportunities. So you won't find other opportunities on here that aren't actually issued by the federal government. So that is something to keep in mind as you're looking here. If you're looking for a state or a local, it might...
don't give it away.
Sorry.
Let's come to that. Let's come to that. Don't give that away yet. Okay. I did do a search here to try to narrow it down some. So each of these opportunities right here are available, and they're more specific to Maine. I also said that these were for profit, so a small business in Maine. And so just to show, like, I know it's hard and everything's kind of crazy right now, but in 5 seconds, I found these 10 opportunities that are all posted. Their deadlines are just in May this summer, so upcoming. And if you're in Maine, these are eligible, and you're a small business, these could be eligible for you. All right. Also on grants.gov, one of the elements, when you click on an individual opportunity, I wanted to show you this. Do not be afraid to hit that subscribe button. In fact, if it is an opportunity that you want to pursue, I would almost demand you hit that subscribe button, because there are updates coming out regularly. And when you hit subscribe, those updates are going to go straight to your email. And that is very important. If you start working and you put all this time and energy to something, and then you realize that there was an update that you need to use a different BioSketch form, or the budget needs to use this form, or there's a new page limit, you don't want to be scrambling and getting that rejection at the end. So hit that subscribe button. All of the documents that you'll need to apply are located in this package. Very user-friendly, in my opinion, although there is the bias that I use this regularly. Yeah. So, okay. Now for state and local funding opportunities. So like I said, when I was just searching for Maine. I know there might be people on here outside of Maine, but they're the ones that recruited us, so they get the freebies today. So I found this Maine Funding Network, and it is actually for small businesses, but these are looking for different loans. So you might have to pay some of those back. But it was an interesting link and a great way to connect small businesses with different funding opportunities. I also looked at Maine's Office of state procurement services here. And I was really impressed in that they have their own little search engine and they're looking for vendors. And so you can apply for grants from the state of Maine. Then we also have Maine.gov. So if you're in Maine and you're looking for funding from your state, that should be the website you should go to. What I really liked about this last website is they have it by focus. And the focuses were innovation, community, trade, agriculture, and regional. And so that it's not just jumbled up, it's actually very organized. So whoever put that website together compared to other states, you get an A+ in my book. All right, for foundations and industries and nonprofits, the overall advice is you have to find these on your own. So think about who you already know. I work in a lot of heart failure and coagulation. Abbott Laboratories is a big supplier. Well, they're a big supplier in most biomed. I go to their website. So first, I would just kind of make a list. Who are you already working with? Who are the big companies or foundations or nonprofits that are already in your realm that you know of, and start looking at them. Here are some of and Allie gets credit for this. She has a even bigger list of different things that we can look for, have looked for. Foundation Directory is a great one. What I will say, and the Candid Philanthropy News Digest also, like out of the whole list, I think those two are probably the most helpful. And on the Candid Philanthropy News Digest, they will email it to you and it's free. Not all of these are free, but we have some on there, like Dr. Scholl's Foundation. Like everyone seems to have some type of philanthropy if you make it to a big enough company. So check those out. This is just a starting point. Again, Google searching is probably your best way to find a foundation or nonprofit opportunity. For industry, just let me begin with, these are the hardest to find. So Google and word of mouth is really your friend here. I wanted to touch on SBIRs or STTRs. Even if you are a state government person or a federal government person, you can partner on these. And we'll talk a little bit more about SBIRs in a moment, but especially if you're a small business. These opportunities seem to be at their full funding levels and moving forward. So we're working more in this area right now. I also saw the Maine International Trade Center. This was a great link, and it helps create partners and private funding to help companies enter and succeed in international markets. Admittedly, industry grants are not Allie and I's strong suit. So I am repeating what's told to us. If you're looking at industry funding, we're probably not going to be your strongest help, but there are people out there we can connect you with them. However, SBIRs and STTRs, we're all over this. And what I wanted you to think about is how maybe you can partner. If you are a small business, right now. But if you are in the government or with an agency, 30% of an SBIR can go to a government. So one of the companies we work with needed public health data. They partnered with their local public health board. There might be someone that has this great new education strategy or technology, and they need to partner with your state agency to gather this data. An SBIR, so let me define what they are. SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research. STTR stands for Small Business Technology Transfer. So almost all of the federal agencies, well, the 5 big ones, have a system in place to support small businesses. And this is for the development of a technology. It is not for expanding or business expansion. So you do need to have some type of research goal or technology that you're trying to develop. And the small business involved, who would be the main applicant, you're a small business. If you're 500 or fewer employees, you need to be a for-profit. So you can't be a nonprofit and applying for an SBIR, at least not as the main applicant. It does need to be primarily US owned. That means 51% of the membership or the ownership needs to be a US or naturalized citizen. And the person who is submitting this is the small business, not the subcontractor. Okay. Now you get a break from me. I'm gonna drink my coffee. But we can pause there if there's any questions on finding opportunities before we go to, once you've found the opportunity, how to make your checklist and going on. So any questions or we can pause for a second.
Very, very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great. Awesome. Cool. All right, then. So once you've found your opportunity, how are you going to read this thing? And the first thing that I want to say is that it is crucial. And I tell this to faculty members that I work with at universities all the time. For the love of all that is good and holy, read the entire opportunity, the whole thing from start to finish. It is amazing how much information is packed into these things. And so it's really, really crucial that you make sure that you read the entire thing. The things that I tend to look for right off the bat, the first thing is eligibility. So as Michelle mentioned, most of the time, the award is going to go to whatever entity it is that is going to be managing the award. And that is usually not an individual. It is usually some sort of organization. And so there are eligibility criteria that you need to consider when you are going to be looking at the RFP, or the request for proposal, also called the solicitation or the opportunity. An institution eligibility, it can be that only certain kinds of organizations can apply. There are some opportunities out there that are specifically for small businesses. There are opportunities out there that are specifically for universities. There are some that are specifically for federal agencies to apply for. There are some that are specifically for entities of a state to apply for. So you really need to make sure that you are one of those eligible institutions, or that you are employed by one of those eligible institutions before you move forward. There are some out there that are open to everybody. So, you know, it can really vary. It really does depend on what the program is looking for. There's also individual eligibility. So oftentimes the sponsor is really looking for somebody who is going to be stably employed by the organization for a long period of time, so that the person isn't going to necessarily have to leave the organization partway through the funded project. This means that they tend to look for people who have, for instance, terminal degrees in their field, or are at a particular level in terms of employment. They have to have a certain kind of title or something like that. There are opportunities out there that are specifically for students or for people who have recently entered a field. So you need to also make sure that not only does your organization meet the eligibility criteria, but also that you meet the eligibility criteria. There can also be restrictions on how many proposals can go in from a single organization or from a single person. So you want to make sure that you look at that information as well. Oftentimes, not always, but the solicitation will ask for a preliminary submission. So you want to look and see if this is going to be required. These can vary. Letters of intent tend to be submitted when the sponsor wants to know what types of topics are likely to be submitted to the opportunity, so they have an idea of who to look for reviewers. And it also gives them an idea of who is going to be submitting, so they know not to contact those people to be reviewers. The other types of preliminary submissions that you can have will tend to be things where the sponsor wants to know more about what it is that you are doing, so that it can give you an idea if your idea is really going to meet their criteria. So these can be called pre-proposals or concept outlines or white papers. They tend to be 2 to 3 pages long, and they really want to have a little bit more detail about what you're doing. And in this case, what will happen is that the sponsor will let you know, yes, we would like to see more of your idea. Please go ahead and put in a full proposal. Or they will say, no, I'm sorry, this doesn't really fit. We don't want you to go ahead and put a proposal in. Sometimes you will need to put in multiples of these. So one of the federal funding agencies, the National Science Foundation, or NSF, has opportunities that ask for a letter of intent and then ask for a pre-proposal, and you have to get through both of those hurdles before you can actually get invited to put it in for a full proposal. Dates are the other thing that you really want to look at. So there will be dates if they're going to be preliminary submission. So you need to make sure that you pay attention to that. When is the proposal actually due? That's going to be important to know, obviously. Oftentimes, the solicitation will also tell you when you can expect the reviews to happen. In some cases, it will be in the 30 to 60 days after the proposal is submitted. In some cases, it won't happen for 6 months. So for planning purposes, it's good to know when the review is going to happen and also when when you can expect to hear an award. So make sure that you pay attention to that. Also make sure you pay attention to time zones. The federal agencies tend to be pretty good about saying that, 5 p.m. local time. So wherever you happen to be, 5 p.m. that time is when your deadline is. But there are other agencies and also some foundations that will say, we're located on the East Coast. And so it's 5 p.m. Eastern time or noon Eastern time or 10 a.m. Eastern time. And so you really got to pay attention to what time zone is applied to what date. The solicitation is going to have multiple elements in it, and I'm going to touch on each of these briefly, just to give you an idea of what to expect as you're reading the solicitation, and so you have an idea of what you might have to put into a proposal.
I'm going to jump in right here because Allie undersells herself on this. This right here is your checklist. So if you find the solicitation you want, I would encourage you to get this slide and make sure everything that she puts on here, you highlight.
Yeah.
Like this is the basis of what we use for a checklist. So this is another kind of freebie when you're looking at a solicitation. Make sure you have every element she's about to describe.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's good. You will be asked to provide a summary, and in the solicitation, it will tell you how much room you have for a summary. Sometimes you have a paragraph, sometimes you have a page. I will tell you that this is going to be the most important document for your proposal. Oftentimes in the review situation, you'll have 1 or 2, maybe 3 people that have been assigned to read your entire proposal from start to finish. Everybody else on that review panel, and there can be 10 to 20 people on a review panel, will only read your summary, and they will have to weigh in on whether or not they think your proposal needs to be funded. So make sure that your summary concisely explains what it is that you're going to do and why it needs to get funded. The narrative will obviously be the place where you get to provide more detail about what's going to be in the summary. The key things that you're going to want to think about here is why you're going to do it and why the world will end if this doesn't get funded and why you are the person to do this. The solicitation will also have elements in it that will tell you what the sponsor expects you to put into the narrative. So section headings, particular things that they want you to address, for instance. All of that will be in the solicitation and all of it will go into the narrative. The narrative will probably have a page limit, and so you'll want to pay attention to that as well. The biosketch and the current and pending are 2 documents that kind of go hand in hand, so I'm going to talk about them together. The biosketch, biographical sketch, CV, resume, there are multiple terms for it, explains who you are, what your background is, what your expertise is, and why you are the person that can solve the problem that you are proposing. The solicitation will have instructions as to what type of formats that you need to provide this information is, how many pages that you get, that kind of stuff. Biosketches can vary from, 1 page to 5 pages often. There are different formats for different sponsors, and so you really want to pay attention to the information in the solicitation as to how you're supposed to provide this information. Current and pending is going to be something that the sponsor asks for to find out what other kinds of funding that you have, and also what kind of other projects that you were working on.
They're making sure you're not double dipping, right?
Yeah.
So like you don't want to get money from the NIH and then also be getting money from the foundation for the same project. So this is the area where you got to disclose
everything.
Yeah.
And the thing about what Michelle just mentioned about not double dipping, it is perfectly fine for you to submit a proposal, the same proposal, to multiple different places. You can only accept funding from one place. And so the current and pending is one of those documents that sponsors will look at to say, okay, you have submitted this proposal to 3 other different places. maybe we need to find out if they get funded by one of those other places before we decide if we're going to fund them or not. Or maybe we need to work with those other organizations if we really like this project and we really want to be able to fund them. So they're going to be looking at that for a variety of different reasons.
But that's typically looked at after and only looked at if you're scheduled for funding. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid of like, oh, look, I'm submitting this. Is that going to eliminate me? No. Their first, every foundation, I'm sure you'll find one that like doesn't do this. The majority of sponsors are going to figure out who they're funding. Then they're going to start looking at that current and pending to just do their due diligence afterwards.
Right. The other thing that sponsors are looking for in the current and pending is your time commitment.
Yes.
So I will say that if you already have 12 projects going, they're going to be a little curious as to how you're going to provide enough time to do what it is that you're planning on doing. So you'll need to explain that very clearly in your proposal. The next two elements that I'm going to talk about in conjunction with each other are the budget and the facilities, excuse me, facilities and equipment documents. So these two documents basically are where you get to explain what you need in order to be able to do the project. The budget is where you're going to ask for the things that you don't have, and the facilities and equipment is where you're going to demonstrate that you have the things you haven't asked for. So they have to go hand in hand. If you need to run a workshop, for instance, you need to demonstrate that you either have the room, the space, the equipment, everything that you need in order to be able to run the workshop, or you have to put it into the budget to demonstrate that you know that you need these things. So these two things are going to go hand in hand. When it comes to the information in the solicitation, this is going to be something that there will be a lot of real estate in that document for the budget. It will outline specifically what they expect to see in the budget and what they expect to see in the justification. The justification needs to justify everything that you put into the budget. And so the solicitation will have a lot of information on the types of things that they're going to be looking for. And I will explain later on in the presentation the types of things that they're going to be looking for.
And I would just jump in here to say, everyone typically applying for the grant kind of knows about this first 3 and they spend all their time there. I cannot tell you, do not underestimate how much time it's going to take you to do the documents she's going to talk about on this bottom half.
Yeah.
The budget can take longer than the narrative.
Yeah.
The documenting the facilities, and it can take a long time.
Yeah.
So we put these up here because people forget about these really important elements.
The narrative is the thing that everybody focuses on, and it can be 10, 15, maybe 20 pages out of 100. So that gives you an idea of how much time you should actually think about all the other things that you're going to need to put together when you are putting together a proposal. The next element here, I've got data management plan up here. I'm also going to sort of combine this with project management plan because more sponsors are looking for both of these elements. The thing to remember, this is particularly true with state and federal sponsors. You are receiving taxpayer money. And so whatever your results are need to be available to the general public. And the data management plan is where the sponsor is going to ask you how you intend to make that happen. So there will be very explicit instructions in the solicitation as to what they expect to see in the data management plan. I'm combining this with the project management plan because oftentimes they go hand in hand with each other. A project management plan is where you explain who's involved, what their roles are, how you're going to talk to each other, how you're going to resolve conflicts, how you're going to deal with publications, who's going to own the information that you are creating. And that also has to tie into the data management plan. So you want to think about these two elements together. And again, this is going to be very clearly spelled out in the solicitation, what you need to think about when you're putting these documents together. The final piece that I want to highlight here is everything else. But I'm going to lump it under collaborators and other documents. This is often referred to as supplemental material or appendices or things like that. There will be some funders that will not allow you to include any of these things, and there will be some that insist that you must include some of these things. And it's going to be very important that you pay attention to what is allowed to go into this type of category and what the solicitation says you may not do. A prime example, the National Institutes of Health really wants to see letters of support, which are from your collaborators saying how fantastic they think your project is, and how important it is, and how it must be done. The National Science Foundation, on the other hand, will throw out your proposal without review if you include a letter of support. They want to see what's called a statement of collaboration, where your collaborators state very succinctly in a single sentence, I will participate in the project as described, and sign their name. Basically so that the reviewers know that the people who are submitting the proposal aren't just making up that they've got this collaboration. They want some documentation from the people that are supposed to be collaborating, but they really don't want to have a lot of extra gushing going on about the proposal. So things like that. So you really want to make sure that you understand what is allowed by the solicitation and what is not. When you are reading the solicitation, you're also going to have some review criteria that you're really going to want to pay attention to. And the easy stuff is things that people often overlook. How many pages are you allowed for each section? What formatting? What kind of font can I use? What size font can I use? Font spacing can be a big thing. How many lines per inch are you allowed to have? So you really want to pay attention to this kind of information. It's going to make or break whether or not the review, you get past the first step to a review panel. You want to pay attention to, as I mentioned, the supplementary documents and any sponsor specific requirements. So oftentimes the sponsor will say, in addition to providing these things, we also need you to provide this document and this document and this document. The example that I'm going to provide is with the National Science Foundation. They want to see a biosketch and a current and pending document. They also want to see a spreadsheet of all your collaborators, and they also want to see a list of your what they call synergistic activities. And these won't necessarily be spelled out that clearly in the solicitation. There'll be references in the solicitation to other documents you need to go and look at. So make sure that you pay attention to this type of information in the solicitation.
And this is, I'm not just us, but a lot of people, this is where working with someone who has already submitted the grant or a professional grant writer or editor really helps, because as you, like, we haven't even started writing the grant. Look at all of this information you need to have on a checklist to make sure you're good to go. And I will say, Allie and I worked on a proposal at Christmas time, and it took Allie, who was fantastic, about an hour to find where was the template on the DoD website for the specific grant. So the time it takes to follow those links and find that information, do not underestimate it, and find someone that can help you with it, particularly if it's your first time through.
Exactly. The hard stuff is the stuff that is a little bit more obvious in the solicitation. That's going to be the stated review criteria. There will be information in the solicitation as to how the reviewers are going to be judging your proposal. This is going to be a gold mine of information for what you really want to think about when you put your narrative together. There are going to be some sponsors that basically state, this is what we're going to be looking for. There are going to be others that will actually give you a very detailed description of what they're going to be looking for, along with the points that they're going to be assigning if you happen to hit all of the things that you're looking that they're looking for. So pay attention to that. Also pay attention to the sponsor mission. Remember that your proposal has to fit whatever it is that the sponsor wants to address. So you need to not only sell, and I say the word sell your project to the sponsor, but explain to them how your project fits into what the sponsor wants to fund. Back to you.
Okay, so now that you've found your opportunity, you have a documented solicitation that's highlighted, you've got your checklist, now you're all set to go. And creating the timeline for your project, There's the ideal timeline, which in our, like, it's starting 6 months, maybe even a year ahead of time. That's the ideal, but we're going to be realistic. For the most part, it's usually like 90 days or less. Allie and I will not work with a client if their timeline is less than 30 days. That's, I mean, next to impossible to gather all of this and be able to submit something worth submitting. So when we talk about timelines, there's the ideal and there's the reality. One of the things that when you're creating your timeline, you also have to think about when the funding comes. So this is an image from the NIH. And you see that negative part, that's the grant writing part. So the FOA, it's a funding opportunity announcement. Sometimes they're called NOFOs. Grant writing is its own language with abbreviations like every industry. But, you know, they talk about -6, starting 6 months ahead of time. But what I want y'all to look at here, this is the NIH. Federal funding can take longer. But you're looking at not getting your notice of award or starting the actual project for 9 to 12 months. So when you're creating your timeline, if you need funding quicker,
don't go for the
federal
NIH.
funding, you know, might not be where you're at.
Yeah.
NSF is shorter. They have a shorter turnaround time. DOD can be shorter or longer.
Much longer. Yeah.
So just, you know, when you're looking at this and creating your timeline, be aware of not just how long it takes to write a good proposal. In my opinion, you really need at least 3 months so that you have time to develop a great proposal, have it reviewed by friends, family, colleagues, and gather all those documents needed. SBIR timelines, I am going back to those because I feel like there's going to be a lot of funding in that sector. I would actually encourage you for an SBIR application to start 6 months ahead of time because a lot of those require commitment and funding at the budget line and quotes. And it is really difficult to get all of those other documents for an SBIR in a reasonable time frame. It is just very stressful trying to do that in a short amount of time. So.
I'm working on a NSF STTR right now, and there's as with many, there is a preliminary thing that you have to go through. You have to go through a project pitch to a committee and get an official invitation to be able to submit. So you've got to factor that into your timeline as well. Once you get that official invitation, you then have 2 funding cycles to be able to submit, which in this case, for instance, the entity I'm working with got their official invitation to submit in April. They have to submit either in the July or in the November submission dates. So you see quite quickly, it can be 6 months out before you're actually going to put the proposal in. But they're doing their due diligence right now by reaching out, getting hold of people at universities to get their required subs and all that kind of stuff. So the timeline is going to be a lot longer than you think it's going to be.
Yeah. And so we always, you know, someone comes to us and says they need funding in 3 months. So can we make this faster? Yeah, sure. We can make it faster. And this is the rule. And I say this over and over. There are 3 elements: good, fast, and cheap for many things. Typically, you only get 2. And in the grant writing process, you really need a good grant. So your options to play with is this going to be fast, which will probably be expensive because you're going to need to hire people to help you get it in? Or are you able to save some money by taking a little bit longer time and having the time necessary and the resources necessary to put in a good application? I am not saying, I mean, I have quit trying to predict which grants will get funded and which ones won't. There's way too many subjective factors in there. But I will say that if you are trying to submit a grant in this short 3-month time frame, you really do need help. I have never, I won't say never, very rarely been a part of that very quick application process. And the only reason I think it worked the 2 times that come to mind are because this was a resubmission and they had experience in it. So there was already some investment ahead of time. So this is just for me to tell you guys, I know it seems like a long time, but grant writing isn't something you can do the night before. Okay. So next, so if you're new to grant writing, which we're assuming y'all are if you're here, the first step is really, after you kind of found an opportunity that you like, is to do some research digging. Some people might call it stalking of the agency itself, and maybe the program officers, someone who has successfully or unsuccessfully applied to this agency. Here's where you got to do your research on the opportunity. The program officer is a general term for the person and the sponsor, the people with the money, that is going to help make decisions. The role of the program officer varies by institution. As you can see here, we've worked with many. These are our personal opinions of how program officers, review officers, scientific officers work. What I want to highlight here, and we can answer specific questions in the question and answer period, is that it varies. At the DoD, the program officer plays such a strong role in how it's reviewed and how it gets funded. And the NIH, the program officer, can really help guide where your application goes and to give you some insight. And then there's other agencies that they're pretty hands-off.
Yeah.
And maybe they rotate, NSF rotates their program officers, right? So they're more of a facilitator and administrator. So there's just varying roles. That's the takeaway from this slide, but you should contact them.
Yeah.
Okay. And contact them professionally. So this side also talks about, the different roles in some of these agencies. And what I would say the key takeaway is don't just like cold call the program officer, like, hey, dude, what's going on? No. Be prepared. Have a one-pager. Have your elevator pitch. I typically suggest contacting the program officer by email, like not just a random phone call, and saying, is there a time that we could meet? Here's a small summary of what I'm looking for, and just looking for insight if this is in line with your program's current initiative. You want to, I also encourage, if you're talking to a program officer on a Zoom call, maybe have one other person with you.
Yeah.
The number of times that Allie or I have been on a call with a client or a collaborator, and we were on the same call with the program officer, and when we got off the call, they're like, oh, they love the project. I was like, really? No.
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, he said, you can submit. I was like, yeah, he said, you can submit. Like you get, so have someone else on the call to help you interpret.
It can also be really helpful to have somebody so you as the person submitting should be the one doing most of the talking and have a list of questions ahead of time that you're going to ask the program officer. It helps to have that second person who is basically just taking notes. Yeah. Because it's impossible for you to actually do the talking and take notes at the same time. You want somebody else in that role, in the note-taking role. And that note-taking role is going to be vital. So have somebody who's good at taking notes.
Yeah. Because if you ask them, can we record this conversation, they're gonna be like, nope. So that's good advice too.
Yeah.
All right, back to you, Allie. Now we're switching over to some grantsmanship and some of our strategies we found.
Yeah. So one of the things that you can do when you are trying to get a proposal ready is you can ask other people who have been successful or even unsuccessful, but who have applied before, if they can help you out. The most common way is if you already know somebody who's submitted to the opportunity or to the sponsor that you are intending to target, and see if they'd be willing to share an old proposal, or if they'd be willing to provide feedback on your proposal, just to make sure that you have all of the elements that they need, if not also to give you some feedback on what they think the sponsor is going to be looking for. Oftentimes, sponsors are going to have workshops, particularly for their high-profile opportunities. Foundations often have seminars on particularly their big ones, as to what they're going to be expecting, and give people a chance to ask questions. But most of the federal and state agencies will have the same kind of thing. Many sponsors also have databases where you can go and see prior awards. Foundations are fantastic at this. They will, because they want to boast about who they funded. So they will often have on their webpage a list of who got the award in the last X number of years, what the title of their project submission was, how much money they received, that kind of thing. There are also federal agencies that have this, the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. Both have award databases. The National Science Foundation is particularly good because you get a copy of the public abstract. And that can be super helpful in getting a good amount of detail into what a sponsor has funded previously, and therefore what they're going to be interested in funding. They won't fund the same idea, but you'll have an idea of what types of things they're going to be interested in.
And that's the thing too. If you look at the sponsor website and they're already funding what you're proposing,
They may not necessarily want to fund yours.
it means you might need a new idea.
Yeah, or a
twist.
twist of the idea. And I'm putting this up here, but don't do it. It's a really good way to piss people off. You can ask for a Freedom of Information request if you particularly need a proposal, a specific proposal from somebody, and you really want to see the whole thing. And you've asked, if they're willing to share and they say no, which is what you should do first. You can put in a Freedom of Information Act request. It will cost you any future collaboration attempt with that person. And I really don't recommend that you do it, but I'm putting it out there because people do
It is a
it.
possibility.
It is a possibility.
But don't do it.
So a lot of times when people are putting the proposals together, they are focusing very much on why they need to do the thing that they are doing. And don't get me wrong, that is something that is very important. You need to explain to the sponsor why the world will end if your project doesn't get funded. So you have to identify the gap that you're going to be addressing, why it's important for that gap to be filled, and how you're going to fill it. But all that said, people tend to put way too much emphasis into the why they're doing the project when they really need to put more emphasis into the how you're going to do the project. Remember that a lot of times you are going to be submitting your proposal to a panel of your peers, and they will pretty much already have a good idea of what the field is like. So they'll have an idea of why you need to put your proposal in. They want to know how you're going to put it in. And so you really want to think about making sure you have the details of what you're going to be doing. The way you start your narrative can really be a huge impact on how you're going to impress or not impress the reviewers. So I really recommend that you have on that first page a paragraph that goes into, particularly hopeful if it's your first paragraph, what the overall goal is and how you're going to get there. This is really common in proposals to the National Institutes of Health, where you start
Specific aims page.
but also in the narrative itself, in the significance section, which is the first section that you write, it talks about, here is what I'm going to be addressing. Here is the health impact or the health problem that I'm going to be addressing. Here's why it's important. 63% of people that get this disease die. That's obviously a made up statistic, but that type of an impact. Here's what I'm going to be doing to address that, and here's the impact of what I'm doing is going to make. All of that into one paragraph. And that type of format can be applicable to any sponsor. So I really recommend that you think about having on your first page an overview section with that paragraph being your first paragraph that you present. As I said before, you're going to be presenting to a panel of your peers, potentially. So find out how the sponsor recruits people. Either you can ask people that have been involved, you can find out if there is anybody who has reviewed for this particular sponsor, and you can ask them questions about how they were recruited. You could potentially ask the program officer as well, if they can give you a high-level overview of how they select people to review their proposals, just so that you have an idea of what level of information depth your reviewers are going to have. And that will give you an understanding of how much why you have to go into.
And I would say that gives you another opportunity as well when you're talking to that program officer, who one of the toughest abilities is recruiting reviewers, volunteering to be a reviewer.
Yeah.
will give you an incredible amount of insight.
Yeah.
So telling that program officer that you would be willing to volunteer as a reviewer, yes, it will take time. No, you don't get paid, but probably one of the best ways to figure out what that system is like.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that a lot of people forget to do is they're so focused on saying, I'm going to be doing this thing and we're going to get to this point. These are the results that we're going to provide. This is what we're going to create. This is the change that we're going to make. But they forget to talk about the impact. So if you make this change, if you create this thing, if you make this process, what is the impact that's going to have? Make sure that you state that, because otherwise the reviewers are going to be like, and you do all this and then what? So that's something that you really want to make sure that you address in your proposal. When it comes to the literature review or background section that you're going to provide as part of the proposal, again, don't get so much into the weeds. You don't have to give an entire history of the field, whatever it is that you're going to be proposing. Think of it more as, here's how the literature supports the need for my project. So you have identified a problem. Provide the literature review that demonstrates that it is a problem. Provide the literature review that demonstrates that it hasn't been solved. And then you can go ahead and state, and here's how I'm going to come in and save the day. So I'm going to date myself a little bit here. We're going to do a David Letterman top 10 type list of criticisms of proposals. These are actual reviewer comments that I've collected over the years that I have seen over and over and over again. So I want to give you an idea of what you can hear back from reviewers once they've read your proposal, and how you might try and hold off on this happening to your proposal. So the first one, proposal is, or the 10th one, as the case may be, proposal is not relevant to the funding agency's priorities and requirements. This means that the reviewers haven't figured out how your proposal ties into the sponsor mission. And I keep coming back to this. Don't make the reviewer hunt for this type of information. Make sure that it's really clear on that first page how the project lines up with what the sponsor is trying to do as an overall goal. The proposed work can't be completed in the time allowed. This means that the reviewers think that you've packed too much into your project and that you're not going to be able to get it done. A really great way to make sure that you don't fall into this trap is to create a visual timeline. So a Gantt chart, for those that don't know, is essentially, it looks like an Excel spreadsheet where you have color-coded boxes of, in Q1, we're going to be doing these tasks. And in Q2, we're going to be doing these tasks. And in Q3, we're going to be doing these tasks. It can be really helpful to create this type of a chart at the very beginning of your proposal process as you are outlining what it is that you're going to be doing, because that will help you make sure that you are not packing too much in the time frame that you are given. The proposed work does not contribute to important questions in the field of research. This means that you haven't highlighted what that gap is and why that gap needs to be filled. So this is where it's going to be really important that you make sure you cite recent publications. You have to identify to the reviewers why the problem exists that you have said that you're going to address, and why it's important that you're going to be able to, why it's important that this problem get fixed. So use the literature for that. Make sure that you are citing the most recent publications possible. The methodology is not clearly explained, is missing key details, or is out of date. This means that you haven't explained clearly enough what it is that you're going to be doing. And so there can be a wide range of things that you can do to address this. Again, make sure that you are citing recent publications. If you are in a field where you are able to publish your own methods and have that sort of documentation, you can reference those publications. You need to be able to explain to the reviewers that you've really thought about what it is that you're doing, and that if you're going to be doing something that is new, that you can explain why you think that this is the right way to go about solving the problem. Or conversely, if you're going to be using an older method, make sure that you explain why you're using that older method. There are times when methods to address a problem will advance, but you might need to go back to an older one because you're going to take that in a slightly different direction. And so you really need to make sure that you explain all of that. This is coming back to what I was saying before about more how and less why. The proposed work cannot be carried out with the funding requested. That means you haven't done a really good job of explaining between your budget and your facilities and equipment documents that you have everything that you need in order to be able to do the work. So as you're going through your proposal, make sure that you're thinking about what you need to have in your budget, and make sure that you are including a budget justification or a narrative that explains exactly why you need those things. If you have sources of outside support, so if you're getting somebody to donate you a area to do a workshop or access to a database or things like that, make sure that you've got letters of support or letters of commitment from that person so that you have that in writing. The team is well qualified, but missing expertise required for parts of the project. This is something that comes up often when you have somebody who's trying to do everything themselves. Nobody is an expert in everything. So it's really important for you to recognize where you have weaknesses and where you need to bring in collaborators to help make a stronger case for what you're trying to do. When you do that, make sure that everybody's BioSketch, resume, CV, fill in the blank word, demonstrates that they have the expertise that's needed in order to be able to do the project. So this can really be important when you're in more of a science field, but Department of Transportation is really going to want to make sure that you have the ability to address everything that it is that you're trying to do. The panelists cannot find key information or misreads the proposal. As frustrating as this can be to get this kind of feedback, I hate to say it, but this is on you. You need to make sure that your proposal is very clear and concise and is easy to read. So make sure that you use the right section headings. Make sure that you have consistent format so that proposals don't get lost as they're going through subsections. Make sure those subsections are short. Make sure that you have tables and figures in there if you need to provide more information than you can provide in the text. Make sure that you repeat things, not to the point of ad nauseum, but that you repeat them enough so that the reviewer is going to get the information into their head. Help the reviewers find the information. The outcomes described are not all discussed in the research plan, or the research plan does not describe how some goals are met. Oftentimes what happens when you put together a proposal is that you think that you've got all the information down onto the page, but because it's in your head, you've skipped over some stuff when you've gotten it to the page. And so this is where it can be super, super helpful to have somebody else read the draft. I often say that everybody needs an editor, even an editor. Having that second set of eyes, third set of eyes is going to be key to make sure that you haven't forgotten anything. Also, realize that it could be that, this is going back to the Gantt chart, you might be proposing too much. And so you need to really make sure that you can actually get everything done and that you can describe that you're going to be able to get everything done in the time frame or in the budget amount that you have. Keep in mind that you never just write one proposal. You're going to write another one after you get the first one funded. So if you have to leave something out of the project that you were doing, that's a great element that you can put in for, once we get this done, then we're going to go do this. And you can put that into your proposal of future goals for your project. The proposal is poorly written and carelessly edited, which makes the reviewer think the PI will not be able to get results published. This is often something that we see. And again, this is where people like Michelle and I can come in, a colleague can come in, make sure that you have somebody else take a look at this, hire a copy editor, do whatever it is that you need to do to make sure that it is actually really well published. Yeah. I often say to the faculty that I work with on projects that their students should be able to read and understand the proposal. In your case, your coworkers really should be able to understand the proposal. And finally, the proposal is reasonable and well-written and makes a scientific contribution. Yay! But it is not interesting or exciting work and therefore is not competitive. This is heartbreaking because it really means that you haven't adequately described the impact that your work is going to make.
Or the novelty.
Or the novelty. So you really need to make sure that it is very, very clear why you need to do the work, how you're going to do the work, what you expect to accomplish with the work, and what impacts those accomplishments are going to be made. You can do this in both the intro and the conclusion. This is a really good way to use that judicious repetition, where you lay out on your first page, this is what we're going to be doing, where we're going to be going, the impact we're going to be making, and do that again in the conclusion. This is what we expect to happen when we've got this project done. Budgets. There is a particular person, program officer at the National Science Foundation, who anytime you go to a conference and he is presenting, he uses this phrase, ask for what you need, no more and no less. And I think this is a fantastic touchstone to use when you're thinking about your budget. Oftentimes sponsors will say, you can only ask for $100,000. Many times the sponsor will say, I don't know, tell us what you need. So ask for what you need. Don't try to fit more into the budget than what you're actually going to need, because the reviewers will pick up on that. Don't try to leave out things that you actually need, because the reviewers will pick up on that. It's really important that when you're putting your budget together, you know what the details are. So you're going to need to know what salary rates that you're going to have for the people that are going to be working on the project. What are your benefit rates? If there are overhead costs, and if so, what are they?
Also, you can't give yourself a raise. I know
Yeah.
this happens all the time. Like,
Yeah.
you do have to accurately represent what your salary is if you're asking for salary support.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When it comes to travel costs, oftentimes, particularly with federal sponsors, but this trickles down to everybody else too, they're going to expect you to use the General Service Administration rates, which are published on a government website for travel. This will be for per diem and for hotel and for food. So you even though those rates might be lower than what you know is actually going to be you're going to be charged, you need to use those rates. Very specific agencies, and the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense spring to mind. They're going to do your math and find out where you went wrong, and they're going to make you account for every single penny.
Hourly rates and
hourly rates, and I mean they truly are going to be looking for any mistake that they can use so that they can reduce the amount that you've asked for. It's really important that consistency comes in here. When it comes to equipment, so there is a specific federal definition for equipment. It's any single item that's over $10,000 with a lifespan of more than a year. Laptops are not going to be a piece of equipment.
half the time they're disposable now.
Right?
But anyway, yeah.
Any smaller things that you're going to need, that's, you know, a box of gloves or a box of circuits or, you know, things like that. Anything that's under that $10,000 mark is not going to be considered to be an equipment. So it's really important that you have quotes and make sure that you're budgeting things into the correct category. You need to make sure that you can explain why you need what it is that you are asking for. And you must explain everything in the budget. You can't skip over anything. So you can't just say, well, I'm going to fudge a little bit here and put in $1,000.
$10,000 of supplies.
Right? And hope that it's not going to get, no. You have to explain everything. And basically what it comes down to is what Michelle was talking about earlier. Don't do this alone. Don't wait until the last minute. I really recommend that as you are outlining your proposal, you are also making a list of what needs to go into the budget. The number of times that I have read a proposal that was about to get submitted, and I've gone back to the person who is running the project, and I said, okay, in your narrative, you say that you're going to have a workshop. Do you have the funds in the budget to run the workshop? In your narrative, you say you're going to have a website. Do you have the funds in your budget to support the website, to develop the website? in your narrative, you say that you are going to have human subjects that you're going to be working with. Do you have the funds to take care of those human subjects?
Or the budget has enough for a workshop of 50 people, and in the present or the narrative said that the workshop was going to be for 100 people. That's
Or you said in your narrative you're going to have 2 workshops,
Yeah.
and you only have 1.
funding
So
for that.
it is vital to make sure that you create your budget early, you go back to it often, and that you have help in creating your budget. This is not something that you are going to be able to do unless you have experience doing it. There's a whole set of rules and regulations that go along with making budgets that you need to know in order to be able to put a budget together that doesn't run afoul of those rules and regulations. They're not all something that you're just going to be able to pick up on. So ask for help, get the help, find out who at your organization has done this before. There's probably somebody that is tagged with this kind of requirement. So make sure that you work with that person. It is, or if you don't have somebody like that, hire them, you know, find a consultant, find somebody who can do this for you. This is not something that you should be thinking about doing on your own.
And don't go to Reddit for help. There's
No.
there's a whole I love Reddit too, but just think of it as like a restaurant review, right? So Reddit has a lot of great crowdsourcing things on grants. I'm very familiar with them. Some of them are gems, most of them are trash.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there.
Yeah.
So for those of you that love QR codes, here's how you can find us on LinkedIn. Neither of us are very active. I know that we should be, but we're working on that.
And if you want to contact us through LinkedIn, we do get that notification.
Yes,
So
we do respond.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we can stop sharing, and so we can see
Everybody's faces.
Yeah.
Hi.
And now we can finally see the chat. So great.
Any
You got
questions?
10 minutes of question time.
Thank you both very much. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Questions, folks?
And you can, this is your opportunity to
Yeah.
be selfish too. If you have like an individual question, like, how can I have help on this? We're here for it. We're also happy to go to lunch, so no pressure.
Or I can tell you stories about all the times that I asked Allie to help me with something and she looked at what I wanted and said, no.
That is a true story. That is a
Full
true
sentence, no.
No. I will say, so Molly asked me a question the other day about a funding opportunity that she was looking at for the National Science Foundation. Something that you should keep in mind while you're looking for funding opportunities is that you might look at an opportunity and say, oh, this ends in 3 months and it was only published 2 years ago. This was Molly's question to me. She's like, has the funding already been spent? Is it possible for us to apply? And I'm like, yes, because that program has actually been running since 2020. They reissue solicitations almost every year when the new guidance comes out from the National Science Foundation. A lot of National Science Foundation programs will reissue solicitations. They'll change them slightly. And so I fully anticipate that even though the current solicitation has a deadline of July, that it will be reissued again in the fall, and you'll be able to apply for it for the next at least 2 to 3 years. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at solicitations. It's quite likely that even though this one has a particular deadline, find out more about it, do some digging, see if it has been issued in the past, and if so, when it's likely to be reissued. I will tell you that more often than not, solicitations get issued yearly. Those that tend to go for 5 years will get reissued for another 5 years.
Although we're in a whole new era.
That's entirely true.
Allie is the optimist. Okay, again, all right. The NIH, the National Institute of Aging, has not renewed any of their NOFAs.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Yeah, but some of them are past when they were forecasted now.
Yeah.
So they could come.
Mm-hmm.
They could come, but
Yeah.
just make sure they come before you apply.
Yeah.
Any other questions, folks? You're also welcome to follow up with me by email. I dropped my email into chat. I will send the slides out to anyone who sent me an email to ask for them. But you're also welcome to reach out to me with additional questions.
I have a quick
And-
one, if I
Yeah.
could.
Please
So
do.
I'm a small nonprofit, about 120 employees here in Maine. We service adults with adult disabilities. And currently about 90% of our income comes from what Medicaid and what they pay. And that's how our business model is set up. But we have, we have a gardens, we have a walking trail. We have a couple of other things to where we've had small grants in the past that have helped us make sure we get everything clean and those type of things. For somebody in this situation, do you think we could employ a full-time grant writer for a business or a nonprofit like ours? Because we don't normally exist off of grants, right? Or donations, but I know there's money out there.
Yeah.
So what I would say, so Allie's gonna kick me because I always talk ourselves out of jobs. But what I would say is start small. Instead of hiring a full-time grant writer, what I would start off with is, start with a consultant and say, hey, can you do a funding search for us? And there's 2 great agencies. Obviously we're gonna pitch ourselves, but the American Grant Writers Association and the Grant Writers Association. You can go on there. There's lots of different people with different expertise. And I would say start with a consultant and grow it to a full-time position.
Yeah.
And many times I am listed as a program manager. So I help write the grant. And then once the grant is funded, I help manage the reporting and some of the elements of a grant. And so that would be a way to build up towards it rather than taking on that risk. And it helps you learn. Grant writing is the relationship. You'll notice we do not have a website.
Yeah.
We work like a prohibition bar. You've got someone recommends you and then vouches for you, and then we kind of grow from there. Finding a grant writer that matches your passion, matches your voice, and matches your time and needs is kind of like dating. But I would say start small. And find someone that can help you and grow into a full-time role.
Particularly,
yeah, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
particularly in this environment where things are changing so rapidly, and we're not entirely sure what's going to happen at the federal level, and anything that happens at the federal level tends to trickle down.
Yeah.
Having a consultant, part-time, whatever it is that you want to call it, that does the funding searches to make sure that there are opportunities out there that you can apply for, I think is going to be a really wise way to start. And then once you have demonstrated that there are enough opportunities out there on a regular basis for you to consider hiring a full-time grant writer, you can make that step.
Yeah. And typically they're called like a program manager rather than a grant writer. But yeah.
Okay. And you folks could do that. I mean, I could, after all this is done, I could email you guys and we could talk through that.
Absolutely.
Since it's a prohibition thing and this is the only way I'm ever going to find you.
Yeah. And if Molly will vouch for you, well, yeah.
I will.
Thank you. No more questions. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, as much as y'all would like to see our interpretive dance, maybe we'll follow it there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much. I really, really appreciate you being here. Thank you also to our attendees. If you want to follow up with me, please do. You know where to find me, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.